What's going on, guys? It's Mohammed, the host of Aware Alpha, and welcome to episode 50. No, actually, 86 or 87. I don't even know where I'm at here. So just want to say I'm feeling super grateful. I'm feeling very thankful for everything that's going on in my life and just all the awesome guests that I've brought onto the show the last 30 to 40 episodes, and just getting the feedback from the listeners. And I'm really not only listening to my voice and the guest voice for entertainment purposes, but also taking some of this information in and truly implementing them in their day-to-day life. So for me, it's an honor to have a platform here where I'm able to share my voice and bring amazing human beings onto the show, and for them to share their lessons and tips, tools, and tricks. So today we have another special guest. Most of you guys know how I'm inviting and bringing a lot of these guests onto the show is I find them on social media, individuals that I feel called to, individuals that I feel like they have something to say, something to share, and we will all get some value from it. So today's special guest goes by the name of Will. He does a lot of coaching and on trauma, and healing your nervous system and a lot of other things that I've seen on his social media. So with that being said, I'm super excited to get down to this conversation with and welcome onto the podcast, Will.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. I'm really excited to be here, and I love the whole concept behind this podcast. So the Aware Alpha, the name, the energy, I'm sure you've had great guests, and I'm very happy to be one of them.
Thank you so much, brother. And it's interesting for me because I've only had two Canadians onto the show. So when you were like, I'm from Ottawa, Canada, I was like, oh, amazing. We have a Canadian onto the show. One of the first questions that comes to my mind here is just tell me, because for myself, even I'm very new. And even though I have done a lot of healing, I'm very new to the concept of the nervous system. When I think of the nervous system, I think of the fight and flight. Like, is that the part of it? Is that the whole thing? So if you could just elaborate on, because we know, especially these days on social media, we're watching and seeing a lot of things on deregulating the nervous system and all these things, right? So just give us some basic on what is the nervous system, what part of us is the nervous system.
Yeah, let's do an overview quick.
Okay.
And then that will inform our entire conversation, because I feel like understanding the nervous system, having a foundational understanding of the different parts, can form tons of conversations about relationships, about confidence, about emotional problems. So we used to think of the nervous system as having two main parts, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. So that's the fight or flight and the rest or digest. But this really cool doctor named Dr. Stephen Porges came up with this theory, which completely changed the paradigm for how we see the nervous system. He did a lot of studies on mammals to basically formulate this. And what he came up with is what's called the polyvagal theory, which describes three main branches of the nervous system, which can come in combinations, in various different combinations, to basically give rise to almost all of the main types of experiences a human being can find themselves in terms of emotions, in terms of how they're feeling and thinking. And those three different branches of the nervous system are called the dorsal vagus.
Okay.
That's the most primitive. That's the most ancient. That's the oldest phylogenetically, which means our evolutionary past. This was the first one to develop.
Okay.
Then you have the sympathetic, which is the one we know for fight or flight, to mobilize energy and behavior. And then finally, the most recently evolved is called the myelinated ventral vagus. And if you remember from biology, or if you ever studied neuroscience on your own, myelination is basically this fatty layer around a certain tissue or nerve that actually helps it to have more accurate signals and more speed in its signaling. So the myelination of the ventral actually means that it can move quicker and it can send more accurate, precise signals through the body. So in terms of their actions, this will describe, the real important and juicy stuff. The dorsal vagus has the function of shutting us down. So it shuts down emotion, it shuts down action, And it also causes a sort of social withdrawing behavior in terms of as a defensive or survival strategy. Withdraw, shut down, numb. It's a numbing part of the system. And it can also be dissociative. So a person can be disconnected from their emotions or from the world, and in many ways lethargic and just out of it. And then we have the sympathetic, which is a mobilizing circuit, which kind of increases the heart rate, increases energy, gets people to do more things, take more actions, not always good actions, especially if like stuck on. But the person feels compelled to mobilize energy to do things. And it usually coincides with tension in the body, extra tension or tension wanting to be released. And finally, the ventral vagus I find is the most fascinating and interesting one. The ventral vagus connects the various organs of the body, especially the heart, up through into the cheekbones and into the eyes, and actually allows us to express our emotions more accurately. So we can express emotions to people who are around us. We feel safe and comfortable to express ourselves. And then through that expression, we're able to have deeper connections with people. We're able to open up emotionally, trust, be playful back and forth, and then ultimately access flow state and confidence and more enjoyment. So the ventral vagus is ultimately where all true mental health comes from, connecting the emotions and the inner desires we might have in our heart to the rest of our brain, to our face, so that we can live and embody those emotions and desires and experience a lot more flow. So that would be the basic 101 of polyvagal. So the way I see it, at least.
Okay. How would you, because a lot of people say that trauma and childhood trauma stays in the body, right? And you have to heal the body to really get to become, whole and fully heal yourself. So I'm curious, like, so what's the difference between, in the body and the nervous system? Because I feel like, childhood trauma as well, they say that it's, like it messes up with your nervous system and you have to deregulate and heal your nervous system. I'm just curious, like, I don't even know what the question is here, in the sense of like, so what's the difference between, like, when they say the trauma is in the body compared to the trauma is, it's in your nervous system?
Yeah, I think a good metaphor would be like a tree. So you could think of, if somebody's saying, oh, you got to heal the body, that's like they're saying you got to heal the tree and the leaves and stuff. But when you're talking about the nervous system is the root. It's like, that's where all the things percolate up to, through the body, into the way that you express yourself through those leaves and everything. Like the leaves are maybe the behavior or something like that. The nervous system is the root, because it's ultimately the first acting principle onto the rest of the body. So when the nervous system is in a survival state, then the muscles will change their tightness. Then the cells will change. Then the hormones will change. Everything kind of comes like a domino effect after the nervous system. So ultimately, when you do things for your body, it can, like a feedback loop, feed back into the nervous system to support the nervous system to become more regulated. But ultimately, if you can work directly with the nervous system, then you can support change to domino after that. At least that's the way I think of it after having researched it for a long time.
Okay. No, that makes total sense. One of the things that comes to my mind right now is, so how do you heal, or how do you deregulate their nervous system? Like, is it just because you were like, the way you mentioned, there's like different parts of it and different types of it. So it's like, is it just meditation and sitting silence that heals it, or is there, like, does exercise and moving, also, heals the nervous system? So share some ways that you would suggest you could heal this nervous system.
Yeah. So first, let's identify what are 3 or 4 of the main ways that your nervous system could have an issue.
Okay.
Then
I
what
like that.
those issues are, each one of those issues will have a different approach for healing.
Interesting.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's confusing, because a lot of people will say, well, I just meditated and that helped me to heal. Another person's like, whenever I do that, I get super anxious. It doesn't help. And so then people are like, well, it should be the same for everybody. But based on your nervous system state, based on your bio-individual needs, based on your personality and your inclinations, certain things might help you and other things might not. So So I'll give a general idea. So the four main things that I'll look at that are normally categorized, these are the main four, but there's more for sure, is one, a depressive like state. So when somebody's depressed, right? That's implicating the dorsal vagus. And basically the dorsal vagus is way more active chronically than it needs to be. And so that the person feels low emotion, low motivation, numbness, lethargy, and social withdrawal. Okay. They don't feel inclined towards doing things. And I feel like most people have been there at least for one day or 1 hour at some point in their life where they're like, I just don't want to get out of bed. I don't want to do anything. It's just that people who get chronically stuck there, their nervous system becomes imprinted with that pattern, then that becomes an issue, and it can be hard for them to get out of that. So that's number one. This is kind of depression, to just give it a basic term. You got depression. Number two, I'll call it the freeze state. I also call it sort of like internal paralysis. And it's different in that when somebody's in a depression-like state, the nervous system and the energy in the body is so low. Whereas when you start to move up into the freeze state, energy is building in the system. This person feels pressure that they should probably maybe do something, but they feel stuck in taking action. They feel frozen. And so then that freeze state creates this internal sense of contraction, because in the one hand, you have the sympathetic nervous system starting to turn on, kind of think of that as your gas pedal. Yeah. And then you have the dorsal vagus with the brake is fully on. And so you're trying to put the foot on the gas, but the brake's fully on. And there's this tension developing in the system. And this person feels like no matter what I try, I kind of still feel stuck. And so that's like paralysis, that's freeze. And that's a unique state. That's probably one that I've dealt with the most, which unfortunately has its own challenges. And beyond that, I call this one fawn. Fawn, it's referring to a baby deer. A baby deer, when they are attacked by a lion or by a bear of some sort, they'll just kind of go along with it. They're not going to play dead. They're just going to kind of placate the attacker in a strange way. You'll notice the lion will even let go and the deer won't even run away. It'll just stay there and kind of be like, everything's fine. And so they named this specific state after this behavior of baby deers to indicate kind of like a people-pleasing way of going about maintaining its survival. If it's just able to not cause conflict between the lion, it's hoping that the lion will release it. So this people-pleasing mentality, is originated in biology with mammals, but it actually has amazing and important implications with people, because when we're just avoiding conflict, avoiding rejection, avoiding the possibility of abandonment, and then we're shutting down what would be our normal expressions, that fawn-like state gets us to do what we think we should do instead of what we actually would truly want to do. So that can be internalized beliefs you get from other people, like, oh, I should become a doctor. Well, is that really what you want? Or is it just what you feel like you should do to avoid the disapproval from your family, from society, from other people? And so this one, I think, is much more common and less talked about state of the nervous system. And we all kind of go there sometimes, and some of us go there a lot, but it's a problem when you get stuck there and you almost can lose sense of what would I even do if my parents, like, let's say that these weren't my parents, what would I even, like, would I become a doctor? You can lose sense of what your authentic truth would even be. And then ultimately at the end here, we have stress and anxiety, which is our sympathetic nervous system in high overdrive, which is just creating excess tension in the muscles, higher heart rate. And it's very much correlated with worrying, with seeing future outcomes as negative, kind of over preparing, trying to manage and mitigate negative future outcomes. And that's sort of just like the classic worry, stress, anxiety, and that would be sort of the final state of the nervous system. So depending on which one of these four states a person finds themselves in, they would have a different approach to deal with that overall firing pattern. The more the lower on the spectrum, so the dorsal being the lowest, the more we want to actually help to safely cause movement and energize the system. So for that person, just starting with like gentle movement, like neck rolls, slow yoga, maybe something like qigong, and gently getting into their breath and doing activities which bring them out into the world, slightly stimulating but not overwhelming, can actually help to safely mobilize energy. Whereas if we're talking about at the top of the spectrum, which was that stress, anxiety, and worry, we're actually looking to soothe the system, to calm the system, and eventually help that person to feel safe, to like lie down and to feel comfortable without even moving. And what you'll notice when somebody's really in their sympathetic, they're going to be going, and they won't want to stop, and they won't want to slow down. They won't want to lie down. If you ask them, hey, would you like to like just relax on the beach, take a few deep breaths? If somebody's really stuck there, they're going to be like, no, I have way too much to do. I won't be able to do that. Yeah. I don't feel okay to do that. And so for them, there's a different strategy. It's the calming, it's the soothing. And then for the dorsal, which I mentioned was the depressive state, it's more about gently and safely mobilizing energy. And these different strategies will correspond with the different states.
No, I love that. Thank you for actually breaking all that down. That is so much information. I feel like we should charge for that. Like, that was really good stuff. So this is something like a personal experience, and I feel like you said, a lot of people are experiencing this, where we grow up and we go to high school and college, university, and we're just living the expectations of our parents. And just like what they want, to be a doctor, be a lawyer, go to school, get a good education, all stuff like that. So, and then if we're lucky enough in our early 20s, at one point we start to question, what is it that we truly want? And is this really what I want? Do I really want to be a doctor, a nurse, or is this really because I want to please mom and dad, right? So let's say you come to the awareness and you realize, you're like, wow, like I have a lot of people pleasing tendencies. Like I do a lot of things to just get approval from mom and dad, boyfriend, girlfriend. And you start to go through this process of where now you have the awareness, you're like, wow, like I have a lot of people pleasing tendencies. If somebody's there and around that area, what would be some practical things you would suggest for those individuals to go about, what to do to kind of discover more of who you truly are, and to even dive deeper on the people pleasing in the tendencies, on like, why is it that you're doing that? I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yes. Yeah. I love how you mentioned too, like this process of discovery, like the process of discovering who are you truly. I call this sort of journey the unblending process. So you can think of it as like this part of you, which was actually a survival strategy, which was something that you took on so that you could feel safe at home and not cause all these conflicts with your parents because you disagree and you feel like something else you'd like to do. That part of you starts to blend in with who you truly are, and kind of can mask or cover that, or just be blended all together. Is kind of confusing. And so by unblending, so creating space where you can, like, I guess in some way mentally or emotionally separate enough, have a mindful distance between that part being in the driver's seat, now stepping into the passenger seat, and maybe stepping into the back seat, then you can more discover what your true authentic desires are. But like when you're so blended, it can be very confusing. So what I tell people to do right away is focus on the nervous system, because as your nervous system becomes more regulated, you'll feel there's more internal space and you'll get more access to what your true desires are from your ventral state. So what would I tell somebody to do? Well, basically a people-pleasing state is a sympathetic activation. This is the way I look at it, a sympathetic activation. So your body's telling you, you got to do stuff. You got to do stuff. And those are usually the things that you've internalized. I should do these things. So you're pursuing all these goals, but they might not even be the goals you want to do. And then on the other hand, you have a slight dorsal activation, which is shutting down your actual sort of full expression. And so you have basically one foot almost fully on the gas and the other foot like half on the brake. So the car is moving. It's called a functional freeze. The car is moving. You're actually in process doing things in your life, which is why it's so confusing, because you're like, I'm not dysregulated because I'm doing stuff. I'm functional. I'm making money. No problem. But emotionally, internally, you kind of feel a little bit off, or sometimes really off. So the first thing I'll tell people to do is to focus on that overactive sympathetic, because that one's more, there's more foot on the gas than there is on the brake here. So if you can learn how to soothe your nervous system, find the top 5 to 10 things, maybe they're people, places, or certain practices or activities, which you can feel your nervous system. You can, viscerally feel your sympathetic starting to wind down and soothe. Those would be those main things that I would tell that person to practice creating neural pathways practice creating nervous system patterns where your sympathetic down regulates, where your ventral gets to step into the forefront. And then as the nervous system starts to change, let's use the example here of Qigong or Tai Chi or something. Let's say that this individual finds that they're really good at breathing and slowing things down through that. After they work on that patterning, they'll slowly start to find themselves more in ventral. And then those natural insights or intuitions, I genuinely believe this, of what is true for them will start to be more accessible, because these survival states kind of block and limit the blood flow to the front of your brain. And even sometimes your memories and desires are kind of distorted because you're in a survival state. So once those survival qualities start to step to the side, people will naturally start to reevaluate what they want to do. They might say something like, you know what, I'm actually really curious to like become a massage therapist or a body worker. And it just might come to them. They might never have thought it before. Or they're like, I feel this urge to travel somewhere, and it doesn't feel like something I just want to do just for now to feel better, but it feels like this is like deep in my heart that I want to do this. Feels like right for me.
Yeah.
And so those things will start to come online for that person, I believe. And that comes from tending to the nervous system, soothing the nervous system. But another part, just to round this out, is just to be able to become mindful of those thoughts and realizing that just because you've been thinking them doesn't mean that you have to necessarily run that course and stay on that track. For instance, like becoming a doctor. Just because you have been doing it for so long doesn't mean that you have to stay on that track. There has to be a certain amount of flexibility and openness to change. That takes a little bit of mindfulness too. Anyways, I said a lot there. Your
No,
thoughts,
that's
Mohammed?
good. You're giving away, like, if I don't cut you off, that means you're giving away some good stuff. And I'm listening. And like, seriously, that was amazing. And the way you explain it, and that's what I love about bringing different specialists and coaches onto the podcast, because it's not just the information, but it's how you're sharing the information. You're using, like, everyone has a different way of sharing certain information, right? Their way, through their own story, through their own lenses, through their own knowledge. And your experience and the way you're sharing things is, like, it's just very cool to see how you're sharing those information. A lot of stuff I might even be aware of it a little bit, but the way you're putting those words together, it's almost like, sometimes all it takes is, the way they share that story that clicks with me on, like, oh, that's what it was. That's how it's done. That's why this is happening, right? So a question that comes to me is, we're all human beings and we get emotional. Like, it's just very normal to be emotional at times. And I know a lot of men are, men just taught growing up to suppress that emotion. And something that's helped me a lot is to express my emotions, express all of them, right? And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how to deal with emotional, being overwhelmed with our emotions. So, I'm, because I know a lot of listeners that listen to this, same thing. They're doing this work. They're, trying to learn more about themselves, healing their traumas, healing their, nervous system. And a question that I get a lot is like, so like, how to deal with it when I'm like super emotional? I just feel emotionally very overwhelmed. And of course, if it's good emotions, like I'm happy and I'm laughing all by myself the whole day, and like, it's like nobody cares to look into that, because like, oh, I'm happy, I'm really good. But now on those days when you feel emotionally overwhelmed and sad and lost and paranoid, and just things are just not the emotion that you want, how would you suggest to deal with that, or what to look into, or what to do when you have those days where you're just emotionally overwhelmed?
Yeah, I like to really simplify it for people. And you had some really good points. Like, we are super emotional beings by nature. Like, we actually do have these emotions, and our nervous system confirms that just by the way that it's wired.
Yeah.
So the way that I like to simplify it is, like, I wouldn't focus on any specific emotion by itself, but instead have your system wired for safe emotional expression, which involves basically strengthening the ventral vagus, which is that myelinated flow state building nervous system, which connects your heart, which is where emotions, the seat of your emotions lie, often is in these sort of beating patterns and these electromagnetic waves coming from the heart. And it allows those signals to go up through the eyes and through the face and through the cheekbones, so we can actually express emotions, so then they can move through us. So if you're able to strengthen this ventral vagus circuit and feel safe around expressing your emotions, feel a sort of trust with other people, so you don't feel like emotions are going to be manipulated against you, and you're able to sort of create that playful dance between your emotions. You might cry one moment, laugh the next, and then you might feel bonded through your emotions with other people through intimacy. That's all occurring through this ventral vagus pathway. If you're able to strengthen that pathway, I'm sure that no matter what's happening, somebody will be able to process their emotions better. So strengthening and supporting the ventral vagus. And the nickname of the ventral vagus is the social engagement nervous system, which means that it's actually toned or stimulated through social engagement with other people, which is often the exact opposite of what happens when people get into an emotional funk. Is they isolate themselves from other people. They hide away from other people. And so then therefore they don't have this social stimulation to actually help that nerve circuit work by sharing in a trusting way with other people. So something that I would recommend to support somebody who's been going through emotions, maybe they've felt stuck, they're not fully flowing through their body, because emotions are meant to kind of flow, right? Is to see if they can find people who they are safe, they feel safe with, not just mentally that they're like, oh, I should feel safe with this person, but I actually don't. I should feel safe with my dad, but I don't. But people who you genuinely on a visceral level in your body, when you're with them, you feel, I don't feel like I have to hide anything, or I don't feel I have to hide as much as with other people. And when you find those types of people, we can act as these invitations for each other to step into that ventral vagus circuit, because we're receiving these cues of safety from others in our environment that actually helps us to enter into that system that allows our heart to send the signals through our eyes and cheeks and face to express our emotions, and therefore allow the energy to move through. So then we're able to connect. And what you'll notice if you do this, I think for most people, anybody listening, is it feels really daunting at first. But then if you find somebody who you genuinely feel safe with, sometimes it's a partner, sometimes it's a friend, could be a men's circle, could just be like a cool healing group, or just any kind of thing that you really click with, group therapy. When you find that, and then you do express the emotions, you might notice your emotional bandwidth will expand. And so then you might be crying one moment and then laughing the next. And you're like, wow, this is actually like such a relief. And so different than what I thought. We often think of emotional expression having to be this big explosion and breakthrough and catharsis. But really, sometimes it's just like you laugh 1 second, you cry another, and you're like, wow, what a day. And then you feel more expressive, more you. And that's occurring in the ventral vagus circuit, which allows us to do that. So I would say ultimately just focusing on building safe relationships, places where you feel okay and trusting to express maybe just a little bit of emotion, just the tiny little bits at first, and then work on expanding that bandwidth. I think most of us are already intuitively doing that, but that's the pathway that I would share.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. It's so true. But it's like sharing is caring. And I always say, and sharing is therapeutic. And what you mentioned that was super, super key is that in a safe space, right? Because you can share with someone that can't even hold space for you, and if in a negative way, might even make you not want to ever, share at all, because that person wasn't a safe space. I actually host a men's circle here in town, and it's one of the most beautiful things. I've hosted different types and facilitated different types of circles in my lifetime here, but the men's circle that I do, it's interesting. Sometimes I say, I'm like, everyone will thank me that just all the guys that come, they just love it. And I'm like, like I do this for myself, like, and like, it's interesting that everyone is just so grateful for it. Right. But at times it really just feels like it's just as super healing for me as it is for every other man that comes into the circle. And we all have just such a beautiful time, and we share openly everything, right? It's just a super safe space. I'm curious. So Will, how did you get into this space? Like, I'm curious to hear your story. What is, just share. And I say that because, and I ask that is because it's interesting, like if I talk to a psychologist or a therapist or, a neuroscientist, their stories usually like, I went to school and then I decided to get into the space. And what I love about a lot of healers and coaches that authentically just moved into these spaces because of their own stories and something that called them to get into the space. I'm always intrigued to hear their stories, because it wasn't like, like it wasn't like you were 14 or 12 or 10 and like you just were following this path. A lot of times it's like, no, like they kind of went through their own journey, and that journey inspired them to kind of get into the space, right? So share with us about Will, and how did you get into doing the things that you do, and just, stuff that comes to your mind.
Yeah, it's a really long story. It could probably be its own podcast for sure. um I was always into psychology and wellness just as an interest, even from when I was really, really young.
Okay.
And I ended up going to, I think I meditated when I was 16 once, while I just saw a video online, and it was this guy just being like, hey, if you focus on the middle of your forehead, like you can do this type of meditation. I was like, okay. And so I'm there like in my room, it's like 10:30 at night or something, and I'm just meditating. And it sparked something in me, because I was like, this feels different. This feels different than other things that I have felt. And I feel, I don't know, just something I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And then I would practice it at night. And I noticed when I would hold my breath and I would really focus on my forehead, I would be able to like really go deep. But then after 30 seconds, I would need to breathe. And I was like, Anyway, so I just started with that. And then when I went to university, I went to cognitive science first. So cognitive science is the study of like thought processes and how we could use that to, in some ways, like create technologies which can support us. So like Siri and stuff like that uses cognitive science, linguistics, computer science all together to like make something that's like intelligent for us to engage with. I ended up leaving that program and studying psychology because I wanted to learn more about, or just be more immersed in the field of the human mind, and how we can experience wellness, thriving, and how also we have this sorts of dysregulations and problems and all the thousands of different types of problems and how they present for people. And then ultimately, I finished my degree in psychology, but I started to do all my I started to do all my projects on mindfulness. So I started to see if I could weave it into every class. They're like, oh, you have a project in this class? I'm going to do it on like mindfulness and depression. I'm going to do it on mindfulness and anxiety. I'm going to do it on mindfulness and ADHD. And so I would just keep doing mindfulness for all these different projects, eventually finish my degree. And then soon after, so now we're getting into the long story, but soon after I went into the field of sensory deprivation tanks, float.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I went into like floating, and I worked in that industry for 3.5-4 years and floated like hundreds, probably like 500 times plus, and meditated and just explored my own thoughts and minds in these tanks. And then I became a yoga teacher. And so they just kind of just snowballed. It just kind of kept snowballing. And ultimately, I was always just looking for the most clearest way to experience well-being, health, and thriving, and to support people who are in a coping or some kind of a challenge state. And so ultimately that just led me eventually, after all the things, to where I am now, is kind of integrating it all together through a lens of mindfulness, personal development, helping people to, rewire after trauma, and the nervous system, and sandwiching all those things together to help people out.
I love that.
Myself, like, I guess I didn't go into my own emotions, but like, yeah, that also was a big part of it.
I love that. I love what I just got from your story that you shared so far, is that it sounds like, especially like the 500 plus float tanks, like that's a lot of time to just be with your own self, right? I've been in a float tank probably like 5-6 times. That you come from an intellectual, like you have the intellectual knowledge because you studied this stuff, you went to university, and at the same time from an experiential level where you have also experienced certain things and sat with yourself and done some things, right? A question that comes to my mind, so how was your childhood, or what would you say was something that was some of your most toughest or most emotional times in your life that has brought you and made you the man that you are today?
Yeah, so through repeated experiences in my childhood of just different stuff going on in my family specifically, and I bet you a lot of guys tuning into this podcast will relate with my dad. And I went into the freeze state a lot. So that's what I habituated and got conditioned into. And so at a certain point, I think maybe age like kind of like age 9 to like 19 or something like that, I was predominantly in a freeze state for like a long stretches of period of time. Like, of course I would come out of that freeze state, but that was my habituated pattern, was to freeze and to go into internal paralysis. And that could be demonstrated by like drawing a blank when somebody asks you a question. Could be demonstrated by like going to talk to people and then like, I don't know what to say, and kind of freezing, right? Or even in a job interview, you're like, like they ask you a question, you draw that blank. So I existed in that state for such a long period of time, and emotional colors that came into that are usually guilt and shame. When you're feeling frozen, you feel like, well, I should be able to talk, but why am I not? And then you feel guilty is wrong, or maybe something's wrong with me. So that like embarrassment and that feeling like heavy in the head and like wanting to like look down almost like in a depressed like way. I felt that, and I felt how strong that was. And when you're in that, I mean, it to me felt like I couldn't imagine that anybody else was like that, because when I would look, it looked like everybody else was enjoying themselves. So I'm like, oh, it's just me. I have this sort of like this air of, and I didn't have the words for it at the time, but like shame, embarrassment, or just feeling pity or pathetic about like whatever it was at that time. And so then as we began to heal and support that, naturally, I feel like I was very blessed with many situations and got to experience like well-being in ways that I never even knew were possible. And like these stretches of time where I was in such a flow state, maybe just for a few days, but where I was like, wow, holy shit, I feel so good. It gave me this contrast to where I was at before, like shame, lack of self-love, to just confidence and like flow. And then I was like, whoa, so maybe these extremes that I'm seeing, if I'm able to make that shift, like I can also help other people to enter into that stream of much more flow. And I also remember what that was like when I worked with a life coach and my head felt like it had 1,000-pound weight on it, and all my thoughts were reduced into this circular loop of like, I don't know. I don't, ask me any question, my coach, and all I could say is, I don't know. And I realized like, wow, this is such a heavy place to be, to being then at other points in the future in a place of confidence where I'm sharing or teaching some kind of a breath work or doing a group event or teaching yoga and feeling in my element, feeling in my flow state. Then realizing like, hey, well, I should use this contrast of experience, this journey in the sense of where I have been, to help other people, and not at just the shame and the guilt and all of that, but also like these feelings of dissociation or these feelings of disconnecting, where you feel numb, where you feel numb and maybe even like panic or anxiety and stuff like that. I want to help people with that. I want to help people with all these different states. And ultimately where it kind of led me was, I want to help to be somebody who reformulates our understanding of mental health and psychology, like a whole new paradigm. And I think the nervous system is a part of that paradigm, but I believe that new paradigm is being shaped and formed right now. And lots of people stepping into the space. And I just want somebody who can support that transition into a much more holistic paradigm, specifically around mental and emotional health, that can in the future reshape how we go about creating well-being in a thriving society, thriving individuals. And it's not fully laid out yet, you know what I mean? It's kind of, we're kind of patching it up, we're creating as we go. But I just want to do my best to be a person in the space and a leader talking about these issues.
I love that. No, thank you so much for sharing that. And that's one of the things I love when I bring the guys onto this podcast and talking about these things that not many people are talking about, right? And it's just, and like you said perfectly, like we are it's time for a lot of us to step up and talk about these topics and also do the work on ourselves. And then the more we do the work with ourselves, the more we're able to hold that space for others, right? And for our clients and people in our lives and everyone, right? A question that comes to my mind here, and I love to just follow, because especially when I get deep into the podcast, I have questions that I'm like I want to ask where it's like it's going to help me, and then I have questions that's coming to me where it's just collectively it will help everyone, right? So it's like at some point into the podcast, I have to be able to separate which questions I'm going to ask, which are going to be the most valuable to everyone, and not just like ask the questions I'm like, Will, you got to help me out here, right? So what is your take on how important, because like I truly believe community is, because we're social beings, and I have looked at and read studies where it's not just, living a healthy life, eating all the good food and all that stuff, but like community, eating, having dinners with family and like social is one of the keys to longevity, right? And this is my personal opinion. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. How important would you say is community? And by community, I mean like your intimate partners, your best friends, your family, all your social gathering. How important do you think it is to longevity and living a healthy, long life?
I'm 100% on board with you, Mohammed. This idea of social, it's debatably number one. It's debatably one. And the reason for that is because we're literally wired for it. We're wired for social engagement. And what Stephen Porges writes so eloquently in his book is that mammals are unique in that we're actually able to regulate our emotions, regulate our nervous system state through social interaction. So that means literally when somebody's having a hard time, you go out, have a night together, and you'll notice their emotions are changed. Their physiology is changed. They're maybe beaming or a lot lighter. And that's literally because we regulate our nervous system through social engagement. And we're wired for that. To create the most homeostasis in the body is when we're leading with that ventral vagus social engagement nervous system. So when we lead with that, what happens is our ventral vagus exerts this higher order influence on all of the other nervous systems, and it's able to downregulate all survival responses. So you could think of like anytime you've ever gone to a party or a gathering where you really felt safe, you're having fun, you're just playful, you're joking, you kind of lose yourself in the moment. It's actually like a flow state. You're meeting new people and it's all good. You can really tell by that night when you go to bed or the next morning, the physiology is different. Literally, inflammation is reduced in the gut. Inflammation is reduced throughout the whole system. People's eyes are lighter because more signals are being sent from the heart up through the vagus nerve into the eyes, the cheeks, and the subtle muscles of the ears get you to tune into sound better. You can actually hear people's voices better because the little muscles tone, holding up those little ear bones to tune better into the frequency of sound rather than background noises. And when we're really dysregulated, we hear background noises like tractors, garbage trucks, high frequencies, beeping, honking. You hear that louder, literally because your ear muscles are more slack because you're tuned for survival and not for connection. And so when we're tuned for connection, we're just way more dialed in, way more flow, way more emotionally healthy. But not to mention that I know for a fact now too that our ventral vagus is implicated in this biometric. It's called HRV. Maybe you or some of the listeners have heard of it. It's called heart rate variability. Heart rate variability is this sort of, it's a measure of your nervous system. So the way that your heart beats shows your nervous system's pattern. If your heart rate variability is low, like 10, 20, 30, 40, sometimes that's on the low end, sometimes from some people. And if it's higher, 40, 50, 60, 70, then that spectrum can demonstrate if your nervous system is tight, if your nervous system is inflexible, or if your nervous system is fluid, adaptive, resilient, and much more flowing. And we know now that when people have chronically low HRV, the 9 out of 10 major causes of death are more likely for them. I mean, there's a correlation between low HRV and 9 out of the 10 major causes of death. So that's like diabetes, heart disease, stroke, cancer, pulmonary diseases. And the only one that it's not associated with is car accidents, which is kind of just a random thing. So literally your nervous system and its lack of health or its health is such a huge factor in whether you're more likely to get one of these life-threatening problems. So it's not even a debate really anymore. We know that if your nervous system is healthy, you're less likely to have these issues. And the way you get your nervous system healthy is by being in the social engagement nervous system. It's nicknamed that, but it also has to do with safety, trust, playfulness, intimacy, and flow and self-expression and confidence. And when we're in that part of the nervous system, we're much less likely to have these issues. And I'll guarantee it to anybody who is listening to this, the next time you go and you feel safe, trusting, and you're in a flow state and you're socializing with other people, if you check all of the major things that have to do with health, like biomarkers, you look at your face, you see your sides, are you inflamed? You just look at your body. I guarantee you that you're going to be feeling and looking healthier.
No, I totally believe that myself too. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective on it. I was at a retreat this weekend. It was like a kind of festival / 24-hour silent retreat. And yeah, like there was a whole bunch of people that I knew very well and a whole bunch of people that I met brand new. But yeah, the whole weekend was just such a vibe. And I'm very big on community, and like I'm just a social butterfly by nature. And it's, yeah, like I truly believe it, right? And I feel like just asking that question and sharing that with more people and the importance of it, right? So it's interesting now, right? Because for me, one of the before and after moments of my life was doing a 10-day silent meditation retreat. So for 10 days, I was with 50 men, 50 women, and I was fully silent, right? And I talk also a lot on solitude and the benefits of solitude, right? So it's interesting how I'm also curious to hear your thoughts on this, because like I'm a social animal by nature. Like I love to interact with people. Hence why I have a podcast even, right? So now on the same aspect, I'm also a very big advocate of spending time alone. And because like for me, one of like the big moments of my life was doing that 10-day silent meditation retreat that started a lot of beautiful changes in my life and a lot of inner work, a lot of success in business, so many things. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, I guess, the benefits of also spending time alone. Or unless you maybe disagree and say that there is no benefits, we're open to it. This is a platform for sharing your perspective, right? So yeah, let me know what you think on the advantages or the benefits, or what are your thoughts on spending time in solitude.
So just to quickly check in, what did you do, the Vipassana 10-day, or did you do a different one?
No, the Vipassana. I did the Vipassana in 2019, and I'm going to do it again in next year, the beginning of pretty much 2023.
Nice. Awesome. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I've definitely, I think that one of the ways that solitude, or specifically these types of retreats, can be really helpful. Actually, it's not even just one, but some of the ways that it can be helpful is, one, for many people, they've existed in a fawn-like state and unknowingly for so long, right? So remember how we were saying at the beginning, like you're becoming a doctor, but do you really want to become a doctor? You're doing things, you're pursuing these goals, like maybe even fitness goals. Do you really even care about like having these muscles? Is it for you? What are you doing it for? And so to step outside of all of those social relations and perceived obligations can actually help to free up space for somebody in a way that, if they hadn't been in touch, can just be, a complete game changer, especially for long periods of time. Two, the silent retreat part, I think, is really helpful because people accidentally, inadvertently exaggerate, misrepresent, and lie all the time.
Yeah.
And I genuinely believe that when you lie or when you exaggerate or distort what's true for you, you're creating, there's one signal in your body which knows what's true. And then you're the opposite thing. And it's causing a clash between the two different, nerve signals, literally, like they're causing this distortion pattern in your body, which is not healthy. So literally just by not talking, you all of a sudden now you can't lie to people. You can't distort the truth. You can't exaggerate things like, oh yeah, last night, if like when people used to drink in high school, I don't drink it anymore, but like I remember people would be like, oh dude, I drank like 35 beers.
Yeah.
Did you really?
Yeah.
And so people would just distort these things and they would just get used to it. And then you would create that as a normalized thing. You would just distort what would happen. And that's kind of normal. So you can't do that when you're in a silent retreat setting. You can't distort things. You can't, there's nobody to tell your achievements to. There's nobody to like get your ego pumped up. And I think that it's in itself can be very beneficial. But now on the other hand, I lived at a yoga retreat center for like 4.5, 5 months, mostly by myself. Like there was other people in another house on the property. But I specifically told them, hey, I'm going to like try and be like in a semi-retreat mode. So like, if we don't have to talk, like don't come over. I'm going to just be doing my own thing and doing yoga. Yeah. And I'll say it was during that time that I experienced some of the most challenging emotional stuff because I was isolating myself. And it was for a pretty prolonged period of time. I told you like 4.5, 5 months or so. And after all of that, you know, that's a long time to be spending a lot of times in solitude. Like I would go on these walks to the grocery store and then I would see people and I'd be like, whoa, you know, like I hadn't seen, I've like would forget how do I even like, what do I even say to them? You know, so it felt so weird because I hadn't been talking to people like, and the cashier would be there. I'm like, do I start a conversation? Do I not? I was just kind of in a different headspace because of how much in solitude I was. Yeah. And one of my big takeaways after all of that was, wow, like we friggin' need each other. Like not just as like an idea, but literally to be our best selves, to be healthy, to thrive. And I could feel that yearning now after that time to really connect with people and to emphasize the thing that I was omitting, the thing that I was missing, which was the social interaction. So now I look at it like this. This ventral vagus system that we have, which connects us, allows us to engage and to be intimate and playful and open and flowing. I look at that as that's our unity circuit. You think of it on like a deeper level, like that allows us to experience unity and connection between people, where you can literally experience empathy and a sort of mirroring back of our humanity through other people. And all of the survival systems are our separation circuits. They're the circuits which make us feel alone or disconnected. And so if we're alone and we're in our survival circuits, we feel more disconnected than ever. But if you're able to be alone and to maintain staying in that unity circuit or that ventral vagus, then even when you're not with people, you're still feeling connected. And I think that serves a beautiful purpose. But ultimately, I don't believe anybody, this is just my personal belief, I don't believe anybody came here to just arrive on the planet and to just be alone. I believe came here to interact, to grow, to share, to learn, to help each other. And that's where the true fulfillment comes from, is from the relationships. And so sometimes solitude can actually be a beautiful step to take away, to ultimately re-enter the social sphere with renewed sense of authenticity and who you are and your values. But I would never like encourage somebody to just like, oh yeah, just go live in a cave and leave society forever. Now that I have spent so much time kind of doing my own version of that.
No, you said it so perfectly as well. And I totally agree. And it's interesting when you were sharing that, one of the things for me, like the 10 days did was like, I was always like, I was 28 or 29 when I went and did it. And for as long as I remember all my life, I was like, I couldn't be by myself. Like I was kept busy. I was always doing things. I was people pleasing mom and dad. And like, there was this mask on in a way. Right. And when the 10 days, you know, the first thing it did was I didn't need the mask because like, I'm just here. Like I'm going in this, like I'm silent here for the next 10 days. Second thing about the lying, right? So I didn't have to actually like conversate and I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. You want to do this. You want to like keep myself busy, right? So those are definitely two main things. And one of the things I always say is like, you know, from the moment that we come into this world, into this physical body, is that, you know, somebody else like tells you what to do, what you are, what your name is, what language you speak, what you're going to be, what like you kind of start being programmed, right? And at one point, if you know, have the awareness to just kind of unplug and just go find who you really are. And then you can come back into the world as more whole, and then you can continue to give and interact and live a beautiful life. So I love the way you share that, because yeah, I wouldn't suggest someone to go and be alone for the rest of their lives and go live in a cave. But, it's definitely beneficial to spend some time alone and to really discover yourself and the voices in your head, and which one is fear and which one is intuition, which one is your heart, and just this, like, have an internal meeting, right, with all the different personalities, and then come back into the world sharing more of who you truly are, right? So no, I love the way you put all those things and the way you share them. Like, it's very, very unique from what I've experienced so far on this podcast. One of the last questions: what is your, idea of living a holistic life? What does that look like? Share some things, on what does a holistic life, living a holistic life looks like for Will.
I mean, I always come back full circle, right, to the very simple things, the principles that I talk about. So like the ventral vagus nervous system, I think when you're living and operating from there, from what I've worked with clients who are not necessarily, when we start working, like even having barely any access to that system, to by the end when they're accessing way more, they tell me that I just feel better. I feel happiness in a way that I didn't feel like was accessible before. And so for me, it's just supporting the nervous system to experience this ventral vagal flow state. And when we can do that, I think almost all good things open up. Like when you're in a flow state, when you're in ventral, relationships become easier. Making money becomes easier. Pursuing your goals and not sabotaging yourself becomes easier. Literally just the whole world opens up for you, and you finally have some degree of influence or mastery to move forward and to be a designer or to be a co-creator of your life, to actually play some influence, to get some skin in the game, to do whatever it is you want to do. And I think that's where life truly starts to open up, is when you're in that part of your nervous system. I also look at that the reason a lot of us haven't been in that aspect of the nervous system is the thousands and thousands of years of ancestral baggage and trauma, which is just accumulated over time. And so we can look at ourselves now as pioneers. So people who are actually reshaping this human nervous system, this human system for flow, for openness, for creativity. And as you do that, the sky becomes the limit. I guess you can do so much more things in an empowered way and actually feel like you have some degree of control, rather than just feeling like, well, I haven't had enough opportunities and there's nothing I can really do about it. But to actually be somebody who is the hero of your journey, not the just victim of it. So that's what I look at. But that's just an overarching view. Ultimately, I think each person will have their own value set, their own thing that actually makes them feel the most fulfilled. So when I work with people or talk with people, just help identify what that is. And sometimes when they remember or they just write it down, they're like, oh yeah, I do really care about that. That's something that does matter to me. And then when they live in alignment with that, then they're good. They're all good and they're happy. I think of happiness as a byproduct to nervous system coherence, integrity, and well-being. So it's not like you're always going to be excited or joyful, but well-being is a sort of a core experience of wholeness that will pervade even the sad moments or even the challenging times, where you feel full and you feel at peace or okay with that. And in a way, that is kind of how I look at happiness. So ultimately, just supporting people to experience well-being and access more of who they are. That would be my sort of approach. And then for me, it's the same for me, because I'm doing that for me and also to help other people.
Exactly. No, that's amazing. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. As we finish off the podcast, you will please let everyone know where they can find you, because I'm going to insert that information in the details section. So if anybody wants to connect with you, follow you, work with you, they can find you there.
Yeah, at Will, Will.Darood, Deroode. So at Will.Darood. That's my Instagram. you can connect with me on Facebook, but I'm much more active on Instagram.
Yeah.
I have the Nervous System Reset, which is a 6-week experience where we go into just all the basics of everything you would need to know to recontextualize how you look at your nervous system, how you look at supporting your nervous system, gives you tools, strategies, and definitely techniques that you can use, from nervous system stretches to very state specific breathing exercises. That's all available on my Instagram. You can see that. You can send me a DM if you're curious about any of the things that I offer. Also, just stay tuned on Instagram because I do share information. I mean, that's how you found me. I share information, I share posts, and I go on lives from time to time where I'll just be talking about these types of topics. And if it works well, I get into a flow state and it feels good and people enjoy it. So.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. So as we finish off, man, I just want to say thank you so much for giving an hour of your time. I'm sure not only me, but everyone that's going to listen to this podcast will get some value from it. And I'm sure some practical things that they can start to do. So thank you so much for joining us, brother.
Pleasure, Mohammed. Appreciate you, man.
Thank you, brother. And as we finish off the podcast episode here, everyone listening, I like to set some intentions. And like I always say, my intentions are for you to truly listen to this podcast and take something away from it. And, you're giving an hour of your time for us. So actually take something from this and start to implement it in your day-to-day life. Get intrigued and inspired by some of this information and take action on it. My intentions are for you to truly discover and be the heroes, your own hero for your own journey. And don't play the victim on this journey that we're on, because you don't really get anywhere playing the victim. My intentions are for you to truly discover the power that you have. You have all that you need, just like me and Will here. You have it all within yourself. You just have to take the time and discover all that. And lastly, until next time, stay an aware alpha.